Maybe you should just save your dimes, and then in like 90 years, they'll be worth lots of money.
I'm never going to criticize my husband again when he finds a penny on the ground and picks it up. Never going to criticize him.
Never should. Now, President Obama, of course, joined CNN last night for a town hall called Guns in America. The president tried to prove he's not trying to take Americans' guns away, and he had this to say about the NRA.
The NRA is convinced, many of its members, that somebody's going to come grab your guns. I'm happy to meet with them. I'm happy to talk to them. But the conversation has to be based on facts and truth and what we're actually proposing, not some imaginary fiction in which Obama's trying to take away your guns.
And to discuss this topic further, we want to bring in today's roundtable. Joining us on this Friday is radio and television commentator Ellis Henican. Also with us, political and economic analyst Raul Mas. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
All right, Ellis. The NRA labeled this town hall program, quote, the next installment of the Obama gun ban media circus. I think I got it all.
I think you did.
But they also say they didn't show up even though they were invited because they were only going to get one question. Don't you think it's a cop-out?
Listen, I would think they'd want to be involved in the debate,
yeah,
but you know what? One thing you learn about groups like the NRA is that they're fine when they put out the deceptive, twisted, paranoid, conspiracy theory muckery, but they don't really want to sit down and have a reasonable conversation like the one we're having here today, where we say, what's the problem? What can we do to solve it? How can people of common sense get together and make this world a safer place? They don't want to have that conversation.
Well, Raul, I probably don't agree with Ellis on this issue as a whole, but I have to admit I was disappointed as a gun owner that the NRA did not stand there and at least call out the president for only giving them one question and providing some sort of voice in this. Although I thought Taya Kyle did a wonderful job, and we'll talk about that in a second as a representative for gun owners, but I thought somebody from the NRA, either Wayne LaPierre or Chris Cox, should have been there last night to face the president.
Yeah, look, I mean, it may have been a missed opportunity, quite frankly, but I think that they were right to sort of have their suspicions. I mean, there was an email that was released, I think it was the day before, that it came out from the university. The whole thing had, the university, George Mason University, had absolutely no involvement with sort of picking who was going to show up or was not going to show up. It was all sort of orchestrated by CNN, and I think there's a tremendous amount of skepticism as to whether or not, gun owners would even have the opportunity to speak at the event. Luckily, they did. I mean, much to CNN's credit. And like you said, Taya Kyle and others did a magnificent job. And quite frankly, made the president squirm and very uncomfortable, not by attacking him, but simply by presenting him with facts. I mean, the truth of the matter is that the president has been extremely misleading in terms of what his positions have been on firearms. I mean, he has called for outright bans on semi-automatic weapons. He's in the past been in favor of bans on handguns. He is not in accordance with the Supreme Court decisions in Heller and McDonald. So for him to sort of sit there and be extremely disingenuous and say, oh my gosh, I just want to sit down and have a normal conversation, have a beer with you guys and see if we can't meet them in the middle ground. It's just not the truth. I mean, I don't know what world he lives in, but it's not one in which he is honest with himself and truly honest with the American people. I mean, we all know it's not a question of being paranoid. I've been at this, quite frankly, for the past 40 years. I've been through Saturday Night Special, Kevlar bullets, Glock pistols that don't appear in x-rays. Every 5 years, the gun...
Should I just go home, or are we going to have a conversation?
No. I'm gonna jump in here, guys, for a minute. I want to talk about that moment that John brought up with Taya Kyle, the widow of former U.S. Navy SEAL Chris Kyle. She challenged President Obama's plan for new gun laws. Let's take a look at what she had to say.
By creating new laws, you do give people hope. The thing is that the laws that we create don't stop these horrific things from happening, right? And I understand that background checks aren't necessarily going to stop me from getting a gun, but I also know that they wouldn't have stopped any of the people here in this room from killing, and so it seems like almost a false sense of hope.
Ellis, I want to get your reaction to that. The president responded to her, essentially saying, we have to do something rather than nothing. But is he giving false hope with new laws? A lot of people seem to think he is.
Listen, we can have different ideas about this thing. I think she was very articulate. Seems like a nice lady. I certainly grieve at her loss. But you know what? The only way we're going to make progress is if we sit down and have a reasonable exchange of ideas. You don't like this idea? Well, give me another idea. If you don't think background checks are the answer, well, what about this amount of funding for mental health? We don't have that discussion. We have crazy people frightening law-abiding Americans, and we're getting nowhere.
And I agree too with Ellis on this. Again, probably not on the gun issue as a whole, but one of my areas that I get a little frustrated with the NRA is that they give a lot of money to lawmakers, but they don't give money to lawmakers to lobby on behalf of mental health.
Raul, what's your response to that?
No, listen, I think in that respect, we do have some common ground. I actually believe that the proposals that the president put forward in terms of allowing mental health practitioners that are now prohibited from disclosing the names of patients because of HIPAA, the health insurance.
All right, well, we know we have some common ground, and that's good because I don't think that's a kind of historic for any of us on the issue of gun control. We're going to take a timeout, guys. We got a commercial break coming up here. We got to get to in a second. We're going to come back though and talk a little bit more about this GOP civil war. So says Peggy Noonan. When we come back, we'll talk about that also. What do you think about Mexican drug lord El Chapo back behind bars? How long will he stay there? We've got some great comments. We'll get to those coming up. You can reach us we got our contact info up here on the screen. We look forward to hearing from you. We're coming back after this.
And welcome back to Newsmax Now, and rejoining us once again for round two of our roundtable, radio and television commentator Ellis Henican and political and economic analyst Raul Mas. Thanks for sticking around, guys. The Republican race is heating up as each candidate aims to catch that spotlight, but the Wall Street Journal calls it the GOP establishment's civil war. Peggy Noonan writes that the candidates are starting to throw pretty hard punches. They're all trying to show that they can float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. No point in hand wringing or telling them to stop on the grounds that what they're doing will produce for the Democrats a badly bloodied GOP nominee. Ellis, while the ultimate goal, of course, is to beat the Democratic nominee, will the GOP bloody its nominee too much before the election to even stand a chance against Hillary?
Well, it's kind of heading in that direction. That butterfly bee thing, by the way, as you know, Miranda, is a reference to Muhammad Ali, right? I don't see any world champions in that group, I got to tell you.
Well, I'm not surprised that you're saying that, but Raul, let's get your opinion. Do you think they're beating each other up too badly that it could actually work against them?
Listen, I think, quite frankly, that the traditional base of the Republican Party, the political elite, if you will, of the Republican Party, instead of attacking Donald Trump, ought to look at why the man has actually resonated with so many people. And he's basically, I think, tapped into two things. There's an incredible amount of economic fear amongst a large number of blue-collar workers in America, working-class Americans. And now there's also a lot of fear about ISIS and, the foreign terrorist threat. And it was under traditional Democratic and Republican administrations that we basically signed a bunch of, foreign trade agreements that outsourced millions of American jobs. We basically allowed unfettered migration over our borders and, quite frankly, helped create the mess that we're now in, where for the last 15 years, we've had anemic economic growth in this country. And I think, the rich and powerful of the Republican Party really ought to take a hard look at themselves and say, hey, you know what? This is what people are scared about.
Yeah, well, we
need to address those.
This is really a case study in the dangers of overthinking things. Donald Trump doesn't have the same Republican consultants advising him on his campaign. And I personally do think that things are going to change drastically. I'm not counting him out. We've all been wrong about Donald Trump in the past. But if he doesn't win Iowa, I'm one of the people that believes things are going to change pretty quick. And he's also, with his new attacks on Hillary Clinton, shown the GOP how to go after the Clintons in a very effective way. Ellis, what do you think?
I'm not sure that the Bill's sex life is really the best argument you guys have, John. It's aggressive and it's harsh, but I don't think that's what most Americans care about right now, is whether Bill Clinton had an affair, 20 years ago or something?
But what he does in that ad that was released yesterday, is more or less attack Hillary Clinton for standing idly by and guilt by association, as it were.
Yeah, but then she comes across like the victim,
crazier, and blaming her for it. That's even wilder to blame the wife, isn't it?
I agree with you, Ellis, because I don't think that works. I don't think that. I think I think the best way to go after her would be stick to the emails, stick to people not trusting her. I think going after Bill, she was kind of considered the victim in that. I don't think that's a good way to go about it. But that's my opinion.
I think it's one of his Jedi mind tricks that he's been able to pull out throughout the course of this campaign. I just think it's a master stroke in the way to deal with this. And again, if things change, we'll see if any of the other candidates pick up that same tactic. What do you think, Raul?
Listen, I think you guys are spot on. I mean, I think there's other things that they could be attacking Hillary on, but supposedly the reason Trump did it is because Hillary's playing, the fact that she's a woman and trying to appeal to women's issues, and kind of reminding folks that at least in the Clinton family, there's not a terrific tradition of how you should treat women in the workplace, for example.
Oh, that's a good point. Ellis, if you were advising a Republican candidate how to go after Hillary, what would you suggest?
I mean, she has weaknesses. She's not very likable. I mean, even people who like her don't really like her, right? I mean, I think she's smart and she's impressive, and I think she's got greater sophistication and depth, really, than anyone else in the field. But she's not a charming person in the way that Bill is, and I think you'd have to somehow or another play to that just kind of gut unlikability factor. To me, that's her primary weakness.
And what goes along with that too, I think, one of the starkest contrasts between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is the way they act on the campaign trail. You can say what you want about Donald Trump, but it looks like he is genuinely having fun at every single one of these rallies, especially if you look at the one in Burlington, Vermont.
And he looks like he's just kind of, I mean, I'm sure it is a little more staged and planned, but he looks like he's just, nothing's rehearsed, like he's just, free flow.
It's refreshing, to say the least, even if you don't agree with the ideology. But gentlemen, that's where we're going to have to leave it for today. Ellis, great talking with you. Thanks for being with us. Ellis Henican.
Good seeing you guys. Thank you.
And Raul Mas as well. Great conversation.
And still to come here on Newsmax Now, the State Department releases another batch of Hillary Clinton's emails. We were just talking about that. Many of them classified. Could she be just months away from a criminal indictment? A former U.S. attorney appointed by President Reagan says it's sure looking that way. Find out why. And be sure to stay tuned for Steve Malsberg tonight at 7 o'clock.